In a moment of loneliness and desperation, she sought comfort in the last place she should have, with his best friend. One night of drunk, reckless passion. One positive pregnancy test that changes everything. The autumn of 2018 in Oakdale, Illinois was a season of slow, beautiful decay. The last of the warm days painted the suburban streets in shades of amber and crimson, a fleeting golden hour that stretched for weeks. For Malik Carter and his girlfriend, Shanira Wilson, this period was meant to be the culmination of their 5 years together, a time to build upon the foundation they had laid since their first date in college. Their shared apartment was a capsule of their joint history. A gallery of framed photos on the bookshelf chronicled their journey, grinning faces at a university football game, arms wrapped around each other on a beach in Michigan. Proud poses in their caps and gowns from the University of Illinois. The throw blanket draped over the sofa was the one she had stolen from his dorm room. The set of slightly mismatched coffee mugs were souvenirs from a weekend trip to Chicago. Every object held a memory, a whisper of a time when their world felt smaller and entirely their own. Malik, an ambitious and gifted graphic designer, had become a ghost in that very home. His existence had condensed to the glow of his powerful laptop screen, a portal to a prestigious competition that promised a career-defining position at a leading Chicago agency. His days bled into nights in a seamless cycle of digital creation. Half-empty cups of coffee, long gone cold, formed a miniature skyline on his desk. The relentless clicking of his mouse and the soft tap of keys were the new soundtrack of their home. He existed on a diet of delivery food and determination, his eyes shadowed by a permanent fatigue. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, a fierce fire burned within him. This sacrifice, this all-consuming focus, was not for personal glory alone. It was a calculated investment, a down payment on a shared dream, a future for them, a life of stability and success he was desperate to provide.
Shanira saw the fire, but she only felt its cold absence. Their evenings, once filled with easy laughter and conversations that stretched into the early hours, were now dominated by a heavy, tomb-like silence, punctuated only by the relentless rhythm of his typing. She tried to bridge the growing chasm. She prepared his favorite meals, the aromas of garlic and rosemary meant to lure him back to their world. She left sweet, encouraging notes next to his coffee machine. She suggested evening walks through their neighborhood, hoping the crisp autumn air could revive something between them. But Malik was lost in his digital frontier. His responses were distant, mumbled affirmations or absent-minded nods. His embraces, when they came, felt increasingly automatic, a hollow ritual performed by a body whose spirit was elsewhere. Shanira moved through the rooms of their apartment like a specter, feeling increasingly invisible and unnecessary in the one place she was supposed to feel most seen. Her own career, as a junior attorney, with its structured hours and tangible, if mundane, achievements, felt gray and insignificant next to the brilliant, solitary battle he was fighting. She was fighting for their past, while he was building a future she was no longer sure included her present.
The silence in the apartment had become a physical presence, a thick haze that filled Shanira's lungs with every breath. It was into this quiet despair that Jaden, Malik's best friend since their college days, reappeared like a sudden beam of light cutting through fog. He was Malik's polar opposite. Where Malik was currently still and intense, Jaden was all motion and easy grace. A fitness instructor, his life was built around movement, energy, and spontaneity. He entered a room with a smile that seemed genuine, his laughter a warm, familiar sound that the walls of the apartment had long forgotten. Most importantly, his eyes, clear and attentive, consistently found Shanira and, crucially, saw her. At first, their interactions seemed harmless, even helpful. Jaden would stop by to check on Malik, to offer brotherly support.
But Malik was always buried in his work, his responses distant and hurried. Left in the living room with Shanira, Jaden would naturally turn his attention to her. He asked about her day and then actually listened, his gaze focused on her as she spoke, his reactions to her stories feeling earned and genuine. He was the one who noticed her tea had gone cold and would wordlessly bring her a fresh cup, a small act of care that felt monumental in the context of her emotional neglect. He became a living, breathing reminder of the companionship and simple warmth her life was so painfully lacking. One evening, when Malik sent a terse text about another late night at the office, Jaden's invitation arrived. He suggested trying a new bar that had opened in downtown Oakdale. Shanira hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen, a pang of guilt striking her. But the ache of loneliness, the craving for a conversation that didn't revolve around pixels and deadlines, was far stronger. The evening unfolded in a vibrant blur. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly. They shared stories, they laughed, and later, on a small dance floor, they moved to the music. In his presence, the weight she carried daily lifted. She felt visible, interesting, and undeniably alive again. He drove her home, the car filled with a comfortable post-conversation silence. As they stood outside her apartment building under the soft glow of a street lamp, he took her hand in his. His grasp was firm yet gentle, a simple, deliberate touch that sent the jolt of electricity up her arm, making her heart stammer in her chest. She murmured a goodbye and walked inside, the ghost of his touch still warming her skin. The apartment she entered was dark and utterly silent, a cold, empty shell. The stark contrast between the warmth of the evening and the chilling solitude of her home was a physical blow, a deep ache that settled in her bones, echoing the realization of everything that was missing.
The night arrived draped in the promise of a new beginning. Malik had finally done it. The project was complete, submitted to the judges, and a profound wave of euphoria, mixed with long-suppressed guilt, washed over him. He moved through the apartment with a renewed energy, transforming the space that had been his silent battlefield into a sanctuary of romance. He ordered her favorite Italian food from the expensive place she loved, uncorked a bottle of wine that spoke of celebration, and strung delicate fairy lights across the living room, their soft glow battling the deep twilight settling over Oakdale. When Shanira returned from work, the sight that greeted her made her heart clench with a fragile, soaring hope. The ambient lighting, the aroma of garlic and basil, the bottle of wine breathing on the table. It was the ghost of their former selves resurrected. For a breathtaking moment, she believed the long winter was over. She saw the man she fell in love with shining in his eyes, and she allowed herself to believe that everything was going to be all right. They sat down to eat, but the conversation never truly became theirs. Malik was incapable of talking about anything other than the competition. His eyes burned with a fervent light as he spoke of potential accolades, the significant financial rewards, the prestigious recognition, and the brilliant new life that awaited them in Chicago. He painted a picture of a dazzling future with broad, excited strokes, but he was the only one in the painting. He did not see the light in Shanira's eyes dimming with each passing minute. He did not hear the hollow tone in her soft congratulations. He was celebrating a personal victory, a culmination of his solitary struggle, not the return of their partnership. Then, in a moment that was supposed to be the apex of the evening, he reached into his pocket. His movements were deliberate, charged with significance. He produced a small black velvet box. Shanira's breath hitched, her heart performing a frantic, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. He opened the lid, revealing an elegant diamond ring that caught the fairy lights and splinted them into 100 brilliant shards. He spoke of his work, his sacrifice, his vision. All of it, he insisted, was for them, for their future. But his words, meant to be a vow, landed with the finality of a closing argument. He was presenting her with the result of his project, their life together, neatly planned and now ready for execution. Shanira looked from the glittering stone to his proud, expectant face, and she did not see a promise of love. She saw a beautiful, meticulously designed cage. The
The future, he described, felt like a script she was expected to follow, a supporting role in the story of his success. The walls of the apartment, moments ago so warm and inviting, suddenly felt as if they were closing in on her. The air grew thick, impossible to breathe. A strangled, "I need to think," was all she could manage before she pushed back from the table, the chair legs screeching against the floor. She snatched her purse and fled, the door slamming shut behind her with a sound that echoed like a gunshot through the apartment. She left Malik kneeling on the floor, the ring box still open in his outstretched hand, his face a frozen mask of utter confusion and shattered pride. Sobbing, gasping for air in the cool night, she leaned against the building's brick exterior. Her fingers, trembling uncontrollably, found her phone. With tears blurring the screen, she tapped out the only message that made sense in her collapsing world. A desperate plea sent to the only person who made her feel seen. "Jaden, I can't be alone. Can I come over?"
Shanira woke to the pale, invasive light of morning filtering through horizontal blinds, striping the unfamiliar room in bands of gold and shadow. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of stale alcohol and a pervasive, shared shame that seemed to have seeped into the very fibers of the bedsheets. Her body ached with a deep, systemic exhaustion, every muscle protesting as she shifted silently. The figure of Jaden slept beside her, a still breathing monument to her catastrophic lapse in judgment. Moving with the furtive haste of a thief, she extracted herself from the bed, her movements silent and strained. She gathered her clothes from the floor, where they lay in a disordered heap, dressing with her back turned, not daring to let her gaze linger on the sleeping form, for fear of making the night any more real than it already was. The journey home was a penitent's crawl through a city that seemed mockingly bright and ordinary. Each step was an effort, her head throbbing in time with her heartbeat, a heavy, punishing drumbeat of regret. She braced herself for the storm to come, mentally rehearsing the confrontation. She pictured Malik's face, contorted in rage, etched with betrayal, or shattered by a grief she had caused. She prepared for the screaming, the accusations, the torrent of tears that would inevitably follow her confession. But when she finally pushed open the door to their apartment, she was met not with chaos, but with an unnerving, absolute order. The space was immaculate. Every trace of the previous night's would-be celebration had been erased. The wine glasses washed, the leftover food disposed of, the fairy lights unplugged. The only anomaly was Malik, sitting perfectly still on the edge of the sofa. He was pale, the skin around his eyes raw and red from a sleepless night. His posture was not one of anger, but of utter depletion. On the coffee table before him, sitting alone on the polished wood, was the velvet ring box, its lid open, the diamond inside winking coldly in the morning light. He looked up as she entered, and his gaze was what truly undid her. It held no fire, no fury. Instead, his eyes were voids of pure, depthless emptiness, a cold, barren landscape that made her soul shiver. His voice, when it finally came, was hollow and stripped of all life. "I thought something had happened to you," he said, the words flat and lifeless. This profound indifference, this concern that had curdled into apathy, was a wound far deeper than any rage could have inflicted. He did not ask where she had been. He did not demand an explanation. He simply stood, moved past her as if she were a piece of furniture he no longer had any use for, and closed the door to his studio behind him with a soft, definitive click. That evening, she heard the sound of a suitcase being zipped shut, the shuffling of steps, and the front door opening and closing one final time. He was gone, without a single backward glance, leaving her alone in the deafening silence of their perfectly clean apartment. A month bled into the next, each day leaching more color from Shanira's world until her existence had narrowed to a perpetual state of twilight. She remained in the apartment they had shared, but the space felt cavernous and hollow, every room echoing with the ghost of a future that had been abruptly cancelled. She attempted to bridge the chasm she had created, her fingers trembling as she dialed Malik's number, only to be met with the relentless, sterile ringing that never ended in a connection. Her text messages, ranging from pleading to apologetic, vanished into a digital void, yielding no response, not even a notification of being read. She saw Jaden a handful more times, but whatever had sparked between them that first night quickly fizzled into awkwardness and a shared, unspoken regret. Stripped of the context of secrecy and the desperate need for comfort, they were simply two lonely people trying to kindle warmth from a fire that had already burned out to cold ash. Then, one morning, a sudden violent wave of nausea overtook her as she brushed her teeth. She dismissed it as a physical manifestation of her constant stress, the price of her guilt and sleepless nights. But when the feeling returned the next day, and the day after that, a cold, familiar dread began to uncoil in the pit of her stomach. A quick mental calculation confirmed her deepest fear. Her cycle was late. The mundane hope for a simple explanation evaporated, replaced by a chilling, visceral horror. She bought a test from a pharmacy on the other side of town, avoiding the eyes of the cashier as if her sin were visibly written on her face. Back in the crushing silence of her bathroom, the result manifested with cruel speed. 2 stark pink lines materialized, a definitive and damning verdict delivered on a small plastic stick. It was not a question, it was a sentence. She slid down the wall onto the cold porcelain tiles, clutching the test as if it were a live grenade. Her world, already fractured, now shattered completely, the final pieces falling away into an abyss of unimaginable consequence. She knew, with a certainty that stole her breath, that she had to tell Malik. The question of paternity was a terrifying, unanswerable riddle, a coin toss that would determine the rest of their lives. But the moral right to conceal this from him, even after his cold departure, was a luxury she did not possess. The weight of the secret was already crushing her. With fingers that shook so violently she could barely type, she composed a message on her phone, the words simple and heavy with unspoken doom. "We need to meet. It's important." An hour later, a reply appeared on her screen, its tone as icy and devoid of emotion as the man who sent it. "Fine. Tomorrow, at our park." They met by the same lake where years ago he had asked her to be his girlfriend under a canopy of summer stars. Now the day was a monochrome of gray, the sky a solid sheet of cloud, and a biting wind whipped across the water, churning its surface into a choppy, dark slate. Malik stood waiting, his posture transformed. He was no longer the exhausted, hollowed-out man she had last seen. He was collected, his shoulders set square, his gaze holding a steely, unnerving resolve. Shanira, pale and trembling with a cocktail of fear and nausea, approached him, the words she had rehearsed turning to ash in her mouth. Finally, unable to speak, she simply extended her hand, offering him the plastic test stick, its damning result on full display. He took it, his movements deliberate and calm. His eyes scanned the 2 pink lines, but his face registered no surprise, no flicker of pain. Instead, the faintest, most chilling smile touched the corners of his lips, a gesture so devoid of warmth it made her blood run cold. The absence of the anger or despair she had braced for was more disorienting than any outburst could have been. His voice, when he finally broke the silence, was quiet, yet it carried a strange, ominous firmness that seemed to still the very air around them. "I know." The 2 words landed not as a question, but as a statement of fact.
Shanira froze, her mind reeling. He continued, his tone flat and analytical, as if presenting evidence in a court she hadn't known was in session. I know everything, Shanira. From that very night. The 360-degree security camera I installed for my studio equipment, it captures a portion of the living room. I have the recording. I heard every whisper, every one of your lies. The ground beneath her feet seemed to liquefy. He had known. All this time, through the silent month, through her desperate messages, he had possessed the complete truth and had chosen to say nothing. Her betrayal was not a discovery he had just made. It was a variable in an equation he had already solved. "And I know this isn't my child," he continued, his voice falling like shards of ice, each one piercing what little composure she had left. "But according to the laws of this state, if we are married at the time of the child's birth, I will be automatically declared the legal father, with all the financial obligations that entails for the next 18 years. He paused, allowing the full horror of that legal trap to sink into her, to wrap around her future and squeeze. "But there is good news," he said, his voice softening into a cruel, almost affectionate parody of comfort, a tone that made her skin crawl. "The cohabitation agreement you signed when we moved in here, it grants me exclusive rights to the apartment in the event of a separation. And that competition I worked myself to the bone for, I won. My new agency is transferring me to their New York office. I leave in a week." He took a final step toward her, and for the first time that day, his eyes ignited with the fire she had so longed to see in them. But it was not the fire of love or passion. It was the cold blue flame of pure, unadulterated vengeance. "You made your choice that night, Shanira. And I made mine. You stay here. Alone. Pregnant by a man who doesn't love you. Without a home. Without me. Enjoy the consequences." He turned on his heel and walked away down the path, his figure not once breaking stride, never looking back. He dissolved into the gray of the autumn haze, leaving her utterly alone. Her knees buckled, hitting the cold, hard earth. The world had not ended with a bang, but with the quiet, calculated precision of a perfectly executed plan. A sudden gust of wind snatched the plastic test from her numb fingers, carrying it over the churning, black water of the lake, where it vanished beneath the surface, as if it had never existed.